Hey, Lashpreneurs. On today's episode, we're going to go over some really basic stuff that no matter what level you're at in your journey of being a business owner, you're going to want to consider. And that's really looking at what you need to be looking for in your location to have your business. Now, if you're a home-based business owner, some of this stuff may not be as relevant because you're not going to choose necessarily a location, you're just doing it out of your home. However, if you are actively seeking a house and your goal is to have your business out of your home, well, then you're going to want to consider some of this stuff as well. But mainly I'm talking about commercial lease spaces. So whether you haven't even started your business and you're starting to look at where you're going to host your business and welcome your clients into your business, or if you're thinking about expanding beyond the current space that you're in or the suite that you're in into a bigger location, there's some things I want you to consider and to just kind of help bring your awareness and understanding commercial leases that I thought might be valuable for us to go over today. Now, I actually have a list of 23 things that I think you should consider and at least be aware of and educated on when looking at a commercial lease space. And so I've created a document that you can go download, go to the lashpreneur.com/lease questions. And I'll put that in the show notes here. And you can go download this so you can see all 23 things that you should consider and just be aware of whenever you're considering a commercial lease space. But today, we're going to go over the top 5 things to consider when looking at a commercial lease space. So first and foremost, the majority of you and your clientele are going to be women, right? It doesn't mean we can't get some men in our businesses and that we're not going to serve men, but majority of the women that are going to be, or the majority of the clientele that you're going to have is going to be women. So there are some safety concerns that we want to have top of mind that I find that most of you don't really consider when you're looking at, you don't think about it until your client is actually leaving in the evening, or you're locking up at night and it's 9 o'clock at night and the hallway is really dark and the parking lot isn't well lit, and maybe there's a marijuana dispensary that's in the same shares the same parking lot, and there's a little dicey people. Nothing against people who go to marijuana dispensaries, but sometimes it can bring in a shady clientele, and as a woman walking alone at night in a dark area can be a bit of a concern. So something to just be present of mind is what about the safety concerns about the parking lot, about other businesses there that are going to be open after hours in the evening. How well lit are the hallways, the parking lot? Is there security? Are there cameras? Is it a safe neighborhood at night that a woman leaving her treatment can feel safe in? So just something to think about is it a high transient population area? I know for me, my business, the first location that I opened was really close to a VA hospital. So that is our Veterans Affairs Hospital. It's for those that have served in the military. And we actually had a lot of homeless population in that area, even though otherwise it was a really high-end area. But because of the proximity to the VA hospital, we had a high population of homeless people, and a lot of those people were on drugs, right? VA healthcare aside, and my own beliefs about how effective it is, a lot of drug use is popular in the homeless veterans, right? And they would fall asleep in our stairwell in my location. And so part of what the service that my landlord offered was they had overnight patrol. So they would come in the mornings they would let the homeless people sleep in the stairwell because businesses were closed and they were trying to be nice, but they would get them out before any of the businesses opened, and they would also clean up because oftentimes there was pee and gross and other stuff, and alcohol bottles and all that. So part of the service of what the landlord that made me feel comfortable moving forward with it is that they had already come up with a solution to address the homeless population so that I didn't feel unsafe or I didn't have to like step over a sleeping homeless person to get to my business. So just something to think about is, the safety for your clientele. Would your clientele feel comfortable walking to your space at night or leaving your salon at night? Or would you feel comfortable with you or a team member leaving alone at night? Second thing is the terms of the lease. Now, your standard commercial leases aren't looking for 1 year or less leases, right? Most of them, at least in bigger kind of retail type locations, especially if you have like a grocery store or Target, want 3 to even 5 or 10-year leases. And for most of you, that's a big commitment, and I don't recommend signing up for that lease right off the bat. Work up to that, right? Get proof in your own business that you can be open for a year or 2 or 3 years rather than biting off that big chunk. So looking at the lease terms, ideally when you're first starting out, there's plenty of opportunities available for month to month, 6 month, or even 1 year leases. Most salon suites, I do believe, do 1 year or even less. Now, may be paying more per month because you're not doing the long-term leases, but I want you to organically grow in a way that makes sense rather than you bit off so much that you can't chew it all at once and you don't have the clientele to sustain that. So you're operating at a loss from the get-go, and it's going to take you 6 months to get to where you're just barely breaking even. Like, it's just not a great financial risk to take, especially when you're in the learning curve of building out a business. So grow into the longer term leases and try to find more, especially if you're first starting out, more flexible leases, right? To give you some opportunity, because you're going to be learning what you do and do not like about a location. And there's not a whole lot that you're going to be aware of. I mean, obviously you're listening to this episode, but there's not going to be a whole lot that you're going to be able to predict in your first time having a commercial lease. So even if that means that you're room renting, or that you are, even if you're in a salon suite where you're renting out the room part of the time to just get started, if you're brand new, those are more inexpensive and less commitment minded kind of lease terms, as opposed to you locking in a contract. Because what usually ends up happening is you are locked into that contract and you have no ability to get out of it unless you cancel, in which case it's a huge amount of money to cancel. Either you have to pay out the end of the lease all up front to cancel it, which doesn't make any financial sense, or there is a huge penalty for breaking your lease early. It's breach of contract. There could also be lawsuits involved with that. So just keep in mind, you want to have lower lease terms, especially when you're starting out. If you're at the point where you're expanding, building out a team, and you have data and financials and profitability, and you can look at the numbers to make sure it makes sense, then sure, commit to a 3 or 5 year lease and really build out a long-term business. The other thing to look at in your lease, and this is kind of a bonus tip here, is the clause of terminating the lease. What happens? What is the process for breaking your lease? So if you get into it and you find it's actually an unsafe area and you can't grow your business, or even for those of you, and we'll get into this in point number 3, you can't control the weather, or not the weather, the AC or the humidity or the heat or anything like that, and that's tanking your retention. So you just can't build a clientele because you can't keep lashes on them because you can't impact the environment. What are the consequences of breaking your lease? Just so that you're aware of it going into it, right? It's not saying that you're signing up to with the intention of breaking the lease. Just what is the process? Is it possible? Make sure that's laid out in the lease so that you and the landlord or the leasing agency are all on the same page. Now, much more corporate leasing agencies will have this documented in there. If it's a mom and pop kind of landlord or an investor, they may not have that language in there. So I would make sure that's in the contract. What are the terms of both breaking the lease and renewing the lease? So my first lease was 6 months, which I loved. It was a great kind of me testing out that space. And if I wanted to renew it, I had it in the contract that I could keep my rate at another 6 months, and I would get a discount if it was a year after that. So I was kind of like testing out the leasing space for that 6 months, and I wanted it in there that I could keep it for another 6 months at the same rate or get a discounted rate if I signed on for another year. Not everybody's going to be willing to negotiate. I happen to have a really great leasing agent that helped me put that in there. But again, you're going to want to know what is the minimum amount of time that you can have the lease, what are the options if you need to break it, and what are the options if you want to stay and continue to build there. Third point, control of the AC and the heat for your unit, for your space. This is the number one thing that those that are like, oh, I'll just rent a room in a salon or a bed in the back of a hairstyling salon, and they have no control over the AC and the heat, and it tanks their retention, and they don't know that until they start taking clients and can't figure out why their clients' lashes aren't lasting. The ammonia that is used in hair products and in coloring and perming and all that is floating in the air. So if you're sharing any sort of air or air ducting with a salon, you're going to have it's going to impact your glue in some way. It's a chemical reaction that happens, and sometimes it's completely out of your control if you're sharing air with ammonia-based products. So just be mindful of that if you're considering a hair salon. Also consider hair salons use blow dryers, which heats up the air. So the AC may be blasting in your room if you have a room, because the hair salon's temperature has gone up because 6 stylists are using hair dryers. And so while it may be 75 in the salon space, your room is on the same AC system and it's now 66 in there because the gauge is not in your room, it's out in the main salon area. Something to consider, just to even ask, is there a way to control the temperature? And maybe the other way around too. Maybe your stylists are super cold, so they bump up the heat to 72, but you're in a much smaller room. And so the heat, there's less space for that heat to disperse. And all of a sudden your room is at 77 and the hairstylists, there's 6 of them and 1 of you, and you guys are battling over the AC. So any way that you can have complete and total control over the air conditioning and heat is going to get you the most predictable results for your clients. If you are not in control of it, you are not in control of the results that you can get your clients. Therefore, you're not in control of the growth of your business. It's a bad place to be in. I would highly, highly, highly recommend that not doing anything in a hair salon if you can avoid it at all costs. There's too many things, too many variables with hair styling services that really tank your ability to control your adhesive. So if that's all you're going to take away from this episode, is if you were at all have the option to not be in a hair salon, I highly, highly recommend against that, unless it is a separate AC system and you're in a confined room that you can control the temperature. That might be the only way that you could have some predictability. My first commercial lease space was an interior office space. I didn't need a sink in my room. I know for some of you, you offer services where your state board requires you to have a sink, so I get it. I didn't need to have a sink. The bathroom was a public, or not a public bathroom, but a shared bathroom between several units. I was in an interior hallway. I didn't have to worry about signage. It was 400 square feet, which was huge for just a solo person. It was $400 a month. It was a steal of a deal in a high-end area of town. I found it on Craigslist. Right, Craigslist has a lot of different kind of like hidden areas that you can find commercial lease spaces that aren't necessarily advertised other places. So it just depends on if your community utilizes Craigslist for that purpose, but that's where I found mine. All right, point number 4, cost per square foot. So this is where salon suites actually suck, right? Because they are highly, highly, highly priced per square foot, because they offer a lot more amenities and they are targeted towards the beauty industry service provider. So they tend to jack up the price per square foot. So while you may think that, you know, a $1,200 a month lease is just crazy expensive, you're going to want to look at the price per square foot to get an even understanding of what is comparable in the area. So it's similar to housing, right? Is, you know, houses are priced per square foot. So are commercial leases. It's priced in a very different way. You know, housing costs right now per square foot are, you know, a couple $100 or, you know, $100 per square foot. Whereas leasing is usually priced at like $1 and change per square foot. So like $1.25 per square foot or $2.50 a square foot. So you're going to want to go and just do some data research of like, even for the big spaces, maybe a 2,000 square foot retail space, you're probably not ready for that. Most businesses in our industry don't need that big of a space. It's just excess space. But look at what they price per square foot. So if it's a 2,000 square foot space and it's $12,000 a month, what does that break down to per square foot? Then look at office spaces and how much do they break down per square foot? Then you'll kind of get an idea of what's reasonable based on a variety of factors. So like a retail space that is anchored, is what they call it, by like a Target, right? Means that there's a big box store that is the main draw to that retail space. So all of the other businesses in that area get a lot of walk-by traffic because of the anchor store. So they jack up the prices because the anchor store is drawing a bunch of people in. And so the other businesses in that center tend to benefit from the walking traffic because of how much that Target or, you know, Kroger or whatever is bringing in. So then you're going to want to price it per square foot and compare it per square foot so that you can know what is reasonable for your area. And then you can look at what your budget is. So if, you know, the average is $2 a square foot and you're looking at $200 or a 200 square foot space, you're looking at about a budget of $400 a month. Your salon suites are going to be a lot higher, but also look at the amenities that they have. That you get your own space, you get to customize the paint in the area, you have a break room, you have water to your salon suite. So there's all those other amenities that are built into the lease that you want to consider when it comes to cost per square foot. So again, when you're just coming up with your budget, that's how leases are priced, is cost per square foot. And then another last final tip that I want you to consider is proximity to the freeway and traffic. I want you to go to that space that you're considering during rush hour and see how long it takes you to get there. See from the customer's experience and the client's experience what factors might get in the way. Some people sign up for a great location and a great space, and then, you know, rut-row, come 5 o'clock, it takes an extra hour for a client to go another 5 miles. So that is something to consider of your client experience, and also even what hours you're going to be available. That, you know, for the space I was in during lunch hour, there was no parking in this parking lot. And then all the other parking lots around were paid or they were reserved and they towed. So I chose not to take clients during lunch hour and took that as my break because I didn't want my clients to be stressed out trying to find a spot or have to pay for the parking across the street, which was ridiculously priced in my mind. So just kind of consider the traffic during certain rush hour times and also maybe even a lunch hour if there's a restaurant nearby. So just make sure that when you find a space that you like, go there during rush hour and see how long it takes. So you can communicate to clients, hey, during rush hour, it may take you another 30 minutes. So just to plan for that so that you're not running into clients constantly being stressed out and constantly late due to traffic because of the location you chose. All right, I hope that was a great lesson for you on just 101 on commercial leases. Again, if you want to get the download that has all 23 of these points, go to the lashpreneur.com/lease questions. We'll link it up in the show notes, and I'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.